So this is the third time I've had the honor of getting up here in front of you. And since I've received multiple times the feedback to slow down and speak up, I'm going to try to do that. Communicate with me, if you will. So most importantly, I want to thank all of you for this opportunity to learn how to be a better speaker. I was practicing with Em this morning, and it struck me that it was a year ago last week that I first came to Good Shepherd. And it's really striking to me that I get to be here with you all like this morning. This is a growth edge for me, and it's a tremendous privilege to grow in this community with all of you. It's a privilege I don't take lightly, so thank you. So at first glance, this story and so many of the healing pericopes like it sort of ruffle my feathers and not in a good way. Great. Way to go, Jesus, I want to say. I'm really glad you healed that woman. So now what? Why doesn't this stuff happen now? See, I didn't grow up in one of the Christian cultures of charismatic healing. I'm not saying I don't believe them or really have much of an opinion, merely that those kinds of miracle healings are beyond the scope of my experience. I've never seen someone with a nearly lifelong physical ailment transformed in an instant, and so when I read this story, sometimes I just get a little impatient with God. If then, why not now? How many folks do I know who are praying for, hoping for, literally dying for the healing, transforming touch that this story speaks about? And how many of them will get it? And then I get a little bit more strident. Heck, this woman didn't even ask to be healed. Jesus just spotted her in the crowd, beckoned her over, and healed her. So what the heck, Jesus? What gives? And then I think of my spiritual mentor back in New Haven, Father Stephen, who has answered my bordering on arrogant theodicy questions with a line from the book of Job. Where were you when I made the world? So, all right, calm down. There are many layers to this story, so let's look at it a little more closely. So Jesus is teaching at a synagogue on the Sabbath, the holy day, a day given to God because even God rested on the seventh day. And while Jesus is teaching, a woman, clearly physically marked as other by the hunch of her shoulders and the bend of her spine, appears in the crowd. Certainly in first century Palestine, to be anything other than able-bodied and well is to be seen as accursed, a point well illustrated in another healing pericope in the Gospel of John. A man blind from birth approaches Jesus, and his disciples ask, "Is this man blind because of his sins or because of his father's sins?" And Jesus, ever more patient than I can truly imagine, doesn't respond with, "Why do I hang out with you people?" So anyway, this woman is at synagogue. There's not much indication that she came specifically to see Jesus or to be healed in any way. But Jesus sees her, witnesses her suffering, places his hand upon her, and instantly she is transformed and praises God. So the temple ruler gets indignant and basically says, "People, there is a right way and a wrong way to get healed around here." And having lived in intentional community for a few years, I know a passive-aggressive statement when I hear one. In this strange call-out, the temple ruler addresses neither Jesus, who actually both instigated and performed the healing, nor the woman, but the gathered crowd. In that moment, he makes a power play, arming himself with his religious authority and his knowledge of the law, as well as with the public gaze. He attempts to shame both Jesus and the woman without actually addressing either of them. Interestingly, he also says, "Come and be healed on the right days," not "come and heal on the right days," putting the trespass on anyone who would be improperly made well on the Lord's day, rather than on Jesus, who, pretty much started it. And Jesus, characteristically, is having none of it. He recognizes that this man is completely indifferent to the suffering of those around him. For the temple ruler, the law exists as a tool of self-aggrandizement, as well as a way to systematize God. There is a right way to approach God for healing. There is a right way to do the Sabbath. And this guy knows the right way, and that gives him power. This whole story is about Jesus undermining these kinds of divisions, healing this woman physically to show that, yes, God is a God of healing. We believe in a God who heals, but particularly a God who heals on God's own terms. And then Jesus lays visible the divisions of power that would elevate the temple rulers above the people. The temple ruler is humiliated, literally brought to the ground, and the people are delighted. The same delight we hear about the Sabbath in Isaiah. See, I think there was more than one kind of healing taking place that day at the synagogue. The woman in question was bent over not just by the sheer physicality of her ailment, but by the weight placed on her by the religious authorities of her day. What must it have been like for her, bearing that kind of stigma, perhaps even serving as a cautionary tale for so many years? She holds between her shoulders what the prophet Isaiah calls the yoke of oppression, made up of pointing finger and malicious talk. I think this yoke is what Jesus means when he says that she was bound by Satan, or in another translation, bound by the accuser of the man who would ask her, "What are you doing getting healed today, of all days?" There is a bodily healing happening here, yes, and that's only part of the story. This is also the upending of a power structure so that a community can heal. There's an ugly Christian truism that says, God will never give you more than you can handle, and I think most of us know that to be false. One of my favorite preachers, Lutheran pastor Nadia Bolz-Weber, has a fantastic response to that, which is, God will never give you more struggles than a community can handle. And I think that's particularly salient in this story. A broken community leaves a yoke of oppression on the backs of those who are least able to bear it. Admittedly, it's hard not to feel a little bit foolish and insolent standing up here, not only as a layperson, but as a 25-year-old, traditionally able-bodied, at least for now, and mostly neurotypical person to speak about healing. I recognize that. Admittedly, almost every time I pray for the kind of healing we're talking about, it's been for someone else, and that certainly changes the lens through which I'm working. But I do often find myself praying that God would reach down in a grand intercession and touch the neurons of some of the people closest to me, change the way sodium and potassium exchange electrons in just the most minute ways, deliver us from words like suicidal ideation or schizophrenia. Or, oh God, don't let the bone marrow cells gone amok poison the body of this man I love. And I hope for a miracle, but always thinking myself a little too cynically high church, or is it highbrow, to ever expect to get one. This week I was going over today's readings with my housemate from last year, Chris, whom many of you know. We were talking about healing, what it means, and I was telling him how I struggle with this concept. And he told me an incredibly Anglican story, which I will recount for you just as he told it to me. There once was an Anglican nun, and she had a confessor, and they met in the chapel every Thursday or whatever. And one day, she's in the chapel with her confessor, and she's praying her prayers, and all of a sudden, bam! There's an angel behind the altar. Flaming wings, huge sword, glowing body, the whole works, like, is really pulling the angel thing off well. And pretty freaked out, she kind of elbows her confessor in the ribs. Father, look, it's an angel, right up behind the altar. Without even looking up from his prayers, he answers, "Nonsense, sister. Stop talking silliness and get on with your prayers." The next week, when they meet up again, she says, "Father, you know, there really was an angel behind the altar." And he responds, "I know, sister. I saw it myself, but what does that have anything to do with us? We say our prayers." And then Chris said that maybe that's how healing works. Sometimes it appears in an instant, an immediately noticeable transformation of ourselves and our spaces. The kind of healing I pray for, but don't really hope to get, and get impatient with God about. But even if it does happen, that can't distract us from the task at hand. Get on with your prayers. And sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes we are left unchanged and wondering. And even that can't distract us from the task at hand. Get on with your prayers. And something I want to add to Chris's musings, sometimes, and I'd hesitate to guess, most of the time, the healing we seek is happening in ways that we don't understand or recognize, because it's not bound to our physical bodies, but instead to the communities that hold us and lay hands on us. There's at least two kinds of healing happening in the gospel story today. And we have to look for both, because it's both kinds of healings that allow us to even do the task at hand, which is to love one another in the kind of mercy that Jesus teaches. Amen.